Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello and happy, my God, is it really only Wednesday? You know, after Monday ended, I was literally crawling into bed and I'm like, man, this week has been. And then I realized it was just Monday and we're just at Wednesday. Okay, we've got this. Let's see. I know you're probably hearing so much about the Stormy Daniels-Donald Trump encounter. I really want to steer clear of that, if at all possible. There are other things to dive into. Brian Kemp signing some bills into law yesterday, new budget, tax cuts, blah, 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 blah. One of the stories that I saw leaping right off the laptop for me was a story that WSB-TV Channel 2 here reports from a study that Georgia Tech professor Brian Ahn did that looked into how much equity Metro Atlanta has lost. This study he did finds that Atlantans lost $1.25 billion in equity thanks to selling homes to corporations. Let's go to this story. Part of the American dream, right? Michael Doudna reporting on this from WSB Television.
Yeah, the reason it's part of the American dream is because it can help build the equity with an appreciating asset. And when you look at a house like this, 15 years ago, you would expect it to be owned by someone. But this home's for rent, and many of those are owned by corporations. And when that's the case, that means families are missing out on some equity. Owning a home used to be part of the American dream, as Patrick Vergan knows too well.
That's a dream that my parents, that they never saw.
See, Patrick is the son of Haitian immigrants, and 6 years ago, he achieved that dream by buying a home with friends.
One of my greatest accomplishments, I would say.
And down the street, well, the Haneys see a home as a chance to start building generational wealth.
If you have a kid, you can keep them passing on.
Yes.
Like generational wealth is something good to have.
Yes, absolutely. I tell potential, by the way, I'm a real estate agent. Have I mentioned this? For those of you who listen to the show all the time, you know I mention it all the time. I'm a residential real estate agent, a realtor, if you will, here in Metro Atlanta, one of like 45,000. But I talk to those who I'm trying to coax out of the rent trap, the rent cycle, I call it, into home ownership. I speak to them about how historically the wealth gap in this country between black and white families has been formed along the housing fault line, that because of so many biases and impediments that were concocted to keep African Americans from being able to buy homes historically in this country, that is the formation of much of the wealth gap that exists in the United States. Blockbusting, redlining, profiling, lending bias, even recently, like in the last few years, This doesn't really account for not being able to buy a home, but being able to sell a home and losing equity as well. There has been a praiser bias. Right. If you're an African-American family and you're selling your home and you leave your family photos out, yeah, no, really. There have been studies that have been done recently that bear this out, that families, African-American families selling their homes with their photos, family photos all about, as most people would, right? Those homes appraise for less than they would if the personal belongings were wiped out. Crazy, right? Anyway, back to the wealth gap that exists between black and white families in the United States because of the impediments and biases that existed for folks who wanted to buy homes. I mean, we could go back to returning World War II veterans. World War II veterans were given the GI Bill. Part of that money was to go towards buying homes. There was a huge home ownership boom. It was the creation of the suburbs here in America in large part because those returning World War II veterans had money waiting on them from the federal government. And it wasn't that the Pentagon was being racist. No, the Pentagon knew this was such a big project. They doled the money out, but let the states do the screening process and the divvying out of the cash. And at the state level, there was a lot of racism. Go figure. In the late 40s, early 50s, into the 60s, and the 70s. And so a lot of Black World War II veterans were denied the ability to buy homes. So you can include that among the many reasons why Black families have been unable to buy homes in prior generations. So that is why it's so important to I say get on the moving train. Yeah, the train's moving. It's moving pretty fast. But if you don't hop on the train, you're going to miss the ride. And that ride takes you up the hill where home equity continues to grow. And in Metro Atlanta, it's just going to keep growing. People are still moving here. We don't have enough houses as it is. Condos, townhomes, if you want to include those as well. We don't have enough dwellings for people to live in as it is. And that means supply and demand. If you have a little bit of the supply, the demand is super high. You can ask for more. That's how your home equity grows year over year, generation over generation, decade over decade, et cetera, and so on. Let's get back to the story here.
Now, their neighbors are often no longer families, but corporations, as just 10 companies own more than 30,000 homes in Metro Atlanta.
Half of the buildings around us are owned by corporations.
And Atlanta is ground zero.
So Georgia Tech's Brian Ahn wanted to know what that cost Atlanta communities. So a team studied 95 Atlanta neighborhoods to see how much residents lost in equity by selling to corporations.
What we documented was 1.2 billion loss in home assets.
And the biggest losers, according to the study, have been minority neighborhoods like Mechanicsville, where Patrick and the Haneys live.
A lot of our friends are priced out of home ownership. I don't see it changing. I certainly see it getting worse.
And can I just tell you, because communities, cities, counties, even states, and of course the federal government are so slow to act on this, do you know who's actually fighting the battle and stemming this as much as possible? You're not going to believe homeowners associations. Yeah. And that doesn't help in historically older neighborhoods like Mechanicsville or Summerhill, where there are no homeowners associations, and nobody wants one. Don't get me wrong. I mean, nobody likes an HOA. But homeowners associations are, and new builders who create homeowners associations for their new developments as well, are enacting policies that curb the number of homes that can be owned and rented out. I see this all the time. In fact, one of the companies being cited, I would imagine, in this study is a company that I had loosely sort of worked for occasionally. And it's, well, there are a few actually, but the one in particular I'm thinking about is Home Partners of America. They buy homes that are for sale and then turn around and lease them to individuals, people that I work with, for example, who are looking to purchase but want to lease with the option to purchase leading in. See, I kind of like that. I don't mind. Home Partners of America, Divvy does that. Landis is another. There's somebody else that comes to mind or doesn't come to mind, but in any event, those options do exist. But then there are those who just flat out buy, looking to lease for 3 to 5 years, maybe 10, and then turn around and sell with upwards of 140%, 150% equity. What I mean by that is the price they bought the home at, $200,000, for example, just to use the math and keep it simple. They would turn around and sell it 10 years later for $280,000. That's 140% just to keep the math simple. And by the way, don't think I'm just pulling that number out of my... That literally happened between 2010 and 2020. There were... I think on average, about 150% equity, maybe just a shade under that, found in Metro Atlanta. And it varied, of course. Cobb County better, Roswell, Alpharetta better, Milton better, Clayton County a little bit less, South Atlanta a little bit less. But on average in Metro Atlanta, you bought a house for, say, $200,000. You sold it in 2020. If you bought it in 2010, you sold it in 2020 for $300,000. You just made $100,000 living in the house that you were paying to live in. You made $100,000 extra. It's like making an extra $10,000 a year. Yeah, so get that. While states and cities and counties were slow to deal with the corporate buy-ups in their older neighborhoods, homeowners associations in the newer communities were actually fending them off with rent caps.
And the study really did dive into how much these majority-minority areas, and what it found is that neighborhoods that had a majority of black residents actually lost more than $680 million in equity over that 10-year span. That's more than half, despite taking up only a sliver of the total metro population. We're live in DeKalb. Michael Dowdna, WSB Tonight.
There's also the situation, by the way, where, say, a mother, a father, a grandmother, a grandfather pass on, living in a home. They toughed it out through the struggles that cities like Atlanta went through, and lived in a home that they didn't, because they were older, didn't take as well care of as they could have. The home needs rehabilitation, refurbishing, flip, for example. Folks will come in and see a flip in a neighborhood, buy $150,000 from the family who doesn't live there anymore, doesn't want anything to do with it, just wants to sell it quickly. Here's the loss of equity too. Selling it for rock bottom rate, knowing that the person that they're selling it to could be a flipper, for example, and then the flipper comes in and spends about $50,000, $75,000. Now you're in for $225,000, but voila, you've got a $400,000 home. That happens too. Believe it or not, again, this is me putting my real estate hat on. Believe it or not, families or individuals that are looking to sell in that sort of scenario actually have the option to do the flip themselves without shelling out the money up front. Reach out to your real estate agent and ask them about that. Just use the word. In fact, here's the word I'm going to use. Curbio. It's a company. They're called Curbio. And I know this sounds like promotional, and I know you come here to talk politics or listen to me talk politics or join in on the conversation politically. But this is a political conversation that I'm kind of curious why it's not happening. Housing is a big problem in this country. Anyway, Curbio is a company that sort of comes in and they work with contractors and they let the work get done. They see the equity that you've got built up. They see the value in what you're going to be able to make when you upgrade and then sell the house. And they hedge their bets. They say, all right, you know what? Listen, this house needs that $50,000, $75,000 worth of renovation. We're willing to foot the bill for that. And then when you sell the property, you pay us back. I mean, that's cool, right? That is so cool. I mean, obviously they get paid because they're doing the work. This is like contractor work. They're kind of a conduit for putting the work with the contractors, et cetera, and so on. And so that gives the home buyer who may not have that $50,000 to $75,000 to put into doing the flip themselves. It lets them do the flip without paying for it until the home is sold. And the reason Curbio does it is because they go, okay, well, you signed an agreement with us. We know you're going to sell the house. You're working with a real estate agent. That's how they pair them up anyway. And so we know you're going to sell the house, and we know we're going to make money off of it, and you're going to make money off of it. A lot more money off of it, actually. That's how equity can be gained instead of losing it by just selling at rock bottom rate to a flipper. If you have questions about that, by all means, hit me up. 404-919-2725 is the phone number for the show. Ron at ronshowatl.com. Happy to answer questions about that. I do want to take a quick break and come back and talk about how housing is like the huge political issue that neither party is really talking about, and I think is a huge issue to be diving in on this election cycle when we come back. RonShowATL.com is the show's website. That's where you can go back and listen to past episodes. Yesterday, by the way, I had a fascinating conversation with Georgia State Supreme Court candidate John Barrow, who is running against obvious conservative Andrew Pinson, who has a record on abortion. He is opposed to just about any option for reproductive choice for women. John Barrow is running to defeat him. Andrew, by the way, appointed, not elected. So it's a political issue, and John Barrow believes he should be able to discuss it. And yet a judicial watchdog group here that has sanction power in the state of Georgia wants to sanction him for discussing issues. And he believes voters should know who they're having the opportunity to vote for. By the way, that election coming up in less than 2 weeks, not in November. It's not a general election thing because it's nonpartisan, air quotes. Anyway, that conversation with John Barrow you can listen to at ronshowatl.com. Our thanks for him joining the show yesterday. A former congressman as well. My former congressman, actually, from when I lived in the Augusta area. So you heard me talking a few minutes ago about the $1.2 billion in equity that Metro Atlanta lost. That is almost literally money out of our economy, out of pockets of Metro Atlantans who could be spending in Atlanta or maybe even buying up other properties in Atlanta to fix up rental income properties, et cetera, and so on. And as I mentioned, I'm a real estate agent, so this is something that I'm near and dear to. I actually believe that while we're focusing on the economy, inflation, the war in Gaza, reproductive rights, civil rights, these are all huge issues. The war in Ukraine, the environment, these are all huge issues facing us just from a day-to-day standpoint, but also in the political realm. I feel like housing is an issue that I feel like both candidates, all parties are kind of asleep at the switch at. Again, I mentioned earlier that the cities, counties, the state, federal government have all been sort of asleep at the switch when it comes to dealing with corporate ownership of homes, especially in neighborhoods that don't have homeowners association. That's right. Your HOA, the one you hate. Nobody likes their HOA. The HOA that everybody hates has actually been the one entity of sorts that has sort of put curbs on the number of homes that folks can own to rent out solely. And that includes the corporations. I know this because, again, I've helped out folks who are looking to do the lease purchase program and working with Home Partners of America. Home Partners of America is an LLC as well, by the way, or has a few LLCs that they buy under. They buy with the express intent to turn around and lease to the people that I'm working with or that a real estate's working with who want to do a lease purchase program. And yes, Home Partners is great. Like, I love that Home Partners and Divvy and Landis give their customers the opportunity to purchase the home. They get first right of refusal. But in the meanwhile, they are another one of these faceless entities that own the home in the neighborhoods. And I know that HOAs are the first line of defense because they have rent caps. And I have to, because Home Partners knows this as well, I have to ensure that a home that somebody would like to lease that Home Partners wants to buy on their behalf, I have to know that the neighborhood it's in hasn't met its rent cap or allows for a company like Home Partners to buy it. I have to go through all these procedures and they have to get all these documents signed. So I know all about this. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is home ownership or the ability to buy a home is what is the leading way to grow personal, familial, generational wealth. It's also because of the impediments that existed up until just recently, really. It's also the leading driver of the wealth income gap, the wealth gap that exists between black and white families, because black families were denied the opportunity to buy homes on so many levels for so many decades in this country and for so many dumb reasons. Moving past that, though, I believe housing affordability, the ability to buy a home, to me is a leading issue that no politician, no party is really talking about. And it's such a driver just for the economy and for the kitchen table issues that politicians like to think they're talking about. Home ownership or whatever you're paying for your home and rent is a huge kitchen table issue. Rents have been rising. They've been cooling off a little bit, but home ownership, the cost to buy a home hasn't been. Home prices have been skyrocketing despite the fact that interest rates are, historically high. Well, I say historically. In the last 5 years, 10 years or so, they haven't been at this rate. So they are somewhat high, and it's got a lot of folks thinking against buying. But these rates also have people hesitant to sell because they may have that interest rate that they got when interest rates were in the 2s and the 3s, or they refinanced to get that rate down into the 2s and 3s. And they don't want to leave that rate behind and take up a 6.75% interest rate because that's tens of thousands of dollars over the course of the loan, right? So we have a bit of a glut. We have a supply-demand problem. The demand's there, and that's why the home prices keep going up. It's the supply we don't have. And it's not just folks that aren't looking to sell. It's home buyers who haven't been all that bullish about building. They don't want to overextend themselves and find themselves holding on to a lot of homes and supply to build homes, and another housing bubble kicks in. Everybody talks about housing. There's not going to be a housing bubble. The problem we have is we don't have enough homes built. We haven't really kept pace since the early 2000s, and I could probably go back even further than that, but I know since the early 2000s. Since the 2007-8 housing crisis, when home builders were literally going out of business, and some were just like, we're not building anything more because obviously people are abandoning their homes, they're going into foreclosures, etc. Home builders stopped building. And then, even when they started churning back into the mindset here, 2010 to 2020, they built about the same number of homes in this country that they built between 1960 and 1970. And you're like, okay, well, that's a decade. Okay, they're both decades, right. But we had 160% of the population we had back in 1960, 1970. So we were only building about, 80% of the homes that were necessary then. We had fallen behind in 2008. We were still behind 2010 to 2020. And then the pandemic kicked in, and what did we do? We stopped doing everything, including building homes. And then the interest rates really sunk into the 2s and 3s, and demand really ratcheted up. So we are so far behind on the number of homes built that the prices keep creeping up, and the interest rates are super high. And so we're facing this crisis, and politically, no one's saying we need to goad or push home builders to build faster than they are right now. We need to give them assurances that they can build and not worry about going out of business or falling into heavy debts if, something does happen economically. I mean, we didn't expect the pandemic, right? So we don't know what's around the corner next, but they need assurances. And home buyers need to have options, and they're just so few available that here we are looking at a severe housing shortage and the air quote American dream unattainable for so many, especially the first-time home buyers. There aren't enough of those first-time homes built in the last 15 years, 20 years almost, to put people in a home that is a first-time home. You're either looking at something that you have to rehab, that you buy for less than $200,000 because that's in your budget, or you have to buy something for $450,000 and go way above budget and overextend yourself, and then you're sitting at the kitchen table wondering how you're going to pay the rest of the bills. To me, that's the single biggest political issue that nobody is talking about. All right, going to take a quick break. Back in a sec. The Ron Show on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast.
Archived audio, blogs, social media links, and more, all in one place. Log on at RonShowATL.com. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
We have talked exhaustively and at great lengths about Marjorie Taylor Greene over the 16 or so months that this show has been on the air. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, to me, keeps slipping further and further into irrelevance, except her voters won't quit her. There is no primary opposition to Marjorie Taylor Greene. None. Nobody's trying to unseat her to be the GOP nominee for the 14th district. There are four, God bless them, four Democratic primary candidates on the ballot for the folks in the 14th district to weigh in on in a couple of weeks. And obviously, I mean, it is a ruby red district, so you're not going to know any of these people. Joseph Lee, Derek Houston, Sean Harris, Clarence Blaylock. Now, we've had Sean Harris on the show. He's the fellow who served in the Marine Corps and in the U.S. Army. Smart guy, nice guy. Wish him all the best. Wish him all well. Honestly, I mean, anyone, my God, anyone, please take this woman out. Nobody on the GOP is even stepping up to do it. And what really sucks is, I think I've said this a time or two before. Like, I've spent a lot of time in that district. There are really nice people in that district. It's an economically repressed area of the state, honestly. They are a warm and thoughtful people who, as most folks in the South and throughout Georgia outside the metro bubbles, are well-meaning people. They just get caught up in the partisanship. And she is the only person running. There are no options. There's nobody stepping up to take her on, to primary her out. And a lot of that has to do with the gerrymandering. See, this is it. The gerrymandering that we've let prevail in this country has netted us Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and yeah, the right could name some on the left that are gerrymandered in that warrant better scrutiny, maybe. So Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey et al., they're still talking about taking Mike Johnson out as Speaker of the House, knowing full well that the math ain't mathin'. And again, when is math ever math for a Republican? Nonetheless, they have a list of demands that nobody cares about. But I want you to hear some of their demands as they were talking to the media about this.
These are very reasonable requests, especially given that we have a Republican majority. And the American people gave us a Republican majority because they're fed up with the Democrat policies.
Okay. Gerrymandering also plays a large part in that, and also the fact that, like in New York State, for example, they drew state lines that were alarmingly kind of fair and not tilted towards the party that was in power, the Democratic Party, when that doesn't happen in red states at all. Nonetheless, and we're down to a razor-thin majority, right? We're down to a razor-thin majority in the House. So have the American people really given the GOP a lot of weight? I'd say no.
Asking for the Hastert rule is the right thing to do for my conference.
What she's saying there is that the majority should have a say. The majority in the House should get to have a say about anything that comes up for a floor vote before it comes up for a floor vote. Under House rules, the Speaker schedules floor votes on pending legislation. The Hastert rule, Denny Hastert. Do we want to talk about Dennis Hastert, y'all? Anyway, Dennis Hastert, the Hastert rule says that the Speaker will not schedule a floor vote on any bill that does not have majority support within their party, even if the majority of the members of the House would vote to pass it. First of all, I hate the Hastert rule. Second of all, she seems to forget that this is the people's house. And this is where the two-party system really screws us, man. And we saw this. We knew for months while folks in Ukraine were dying, while Russia was making advancements. And obviously that was part of the game plan all along with her wing of the GOP. I mean, they're in Putin's pocket. She's definitely in Putin's pocket. Anyway, we saw where the Hastert rule, which Mike Johnson tried to, I guess, placate, tried to honor, was his rationale for not bringing aid to Ukraine up for a vote. I have said in my dream of dreams, in a perfect scenario, we would have at least a four-party system in this country. You would have your MAGA wing, you would have your establishment Republican wing, you would have your establishment Democrat wing, you would have your Our Revolution, your progressive wing, your Bernie wing, Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, AOC, et cetera, and so on. And amongst those four factions, you would probably find, in most circumstances, three of the four finding some common ground enough to get something done. Instead, we're stuck with the two-party system that we have, both parties protecting that, and nothing gets accomplished because of the hyper-partisanship that exists in this country. Anyway, she wants to see Mike Johnson continue to adhere to the Hastert rule, even though it does not reflect the will of the majority of the country, just what she wants, the will of the majority within her party. Guarantee you put that up for a referendum, the American people would say, get rid of the Hastert rule. Back to more of her demands.
The majority should support the bills that are voted for on the floor.
No.
Also, demanding no more money for Ukraine. That is the right thing to do, and it also obeys the majority of the majority.
I'm not sure it does, actually. And actually, I think the vote bore that out. Also, you have to decide, and she doesn't want to make this posit, but you have to decide, do we continue to support Ukraine against Vladimir Putin so that we keep Vladimir Putin from invading NATO allies, and then we are heavily involved, our men and women in uniform get involved? Yeah, so that's the choice. Do we continue to support Ukraine to fend off Putin, or do we let Putin continue doing what he's going to do, eventually at Poland's doorstep, and then our men and women are serving overseas? She doesn't want to discuss that.
Also asking for no more special counsels. President Trump is our presidential candidate. He is being abused, and the American people are fed up with it. It is absolutely the right thing to do to end the special counsel. These requests are not complicated.
She's actually wrong, too, about the American people and what they want. A majority of the American people, the American voter, wants a resolution to Donald Trump's many court cases before they vote in November. They want a resolution. Not saying that they want him to be found guilty or want him to be found innocent. The majority of American voters want a resolution. They want to know if he's found guilty. And unfortunately, as we learned yesterday, that ain't going to happen in most of these cases. David Muir last night on ABC News.
There's another breaking headline involving the former president tonight. The judge overseeing Donald Trump's classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago has now indefinitely postponed that trial. Is there any chance this now happens before Election Day? Let's get right to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, live in Washington. Pierre, what have you learned?
David, the likelihood there will be a trial in the classified documents case before the election is fading fast. Judge Eileen Cannon has officially taken a May 20th trial date off the calendar, saying there were too many pretrial motions and legal issues to resolve before a trial could go forward. Some of the issues have sat for months, and some are not even scheduled for hearings until later this month or June. The special counsel tonight declined to comment, but David, this delay makes it all but certain the classified documents case will not go to trial before the election.
Judge Eileen Cannon is the reason why there are all these delays in the first place. She's the one sitting on all of the pretrial motions that need to be hashed out. Anyway, back to Marjorie Taylor Greene and the GOP's inability to deal with her, to move along from her. I'm at least encouraged to see that at the state level here in the state of Georgia, there are actually signs that there are Republicans ready to do away with the nuttiness. Let me introduce you to Angela Pence. Angela Pence is running against Colton Moore for a seat in the heart of Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. She qualified to run for Colton Moore's seat right before the deadline, saying, quote, Senator Moore literally can't do his job. Michelle Baruchman at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution introducing us to Angela Pence. Senator Colton Moore of Trenton became an exile from his own party when he was removed from the Senate Republican caucus for rules violations in September. In March, he was banned from the House of Representatives after he sharply criticized the late State House Speaker David Ralston and cast the lone vote opposing the naming of a building on the University of North Georgia campus in Blue Ridge in his honor. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones cut Colton Moore off as he was speaking that day, saying it was, quote, not the time nor the place to discuss Ralston's personal affairs, especially as his family and friends watched what was supposed to be a celebration of his legacy. House Speaker John Burns banned Moore from entering the chamber. Angela Pence, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, has had enough, at least at the state level. I was sure somebody would step up and primary him, and nobody did, Angela Pence said. I didn't know if I could live with myself if I knew I was capable and didn't get in the race, knowing how much he has hurt our district through his actions. Somebody get me a congressional level Angela Pence in the GOP. I would welcome that. Moore has a history of provocative accusations, Michelle Baruchman writes. In February, he spread false information about secret trafficking at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It turned out that the group he was referencing was an organization of Georgia volunteers that openly helps immigrants navigate the airport. His ousting from the GOP caucus came after he harassed Republican colleagues who refused to aid his effort to call a special legislative session to defund Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis' office after she brought an indictment against former President Donald Trump. It all goes back to Trump, y'all. It really does. The muck that we're dealing with from the GOP all goes back to Donald Trump. Republican leaders said such a session would be impossible without Democratic support or assistance from Governor Brian Kemp, who had already nixed the ideas. Michelle Baruchman continues. A few months later, though, Senate Republicans approved legislation to create a special panel that would investigate Willis as the prosecutor. So did Colton Moore really kind of win there or not? By the way, we saw yesterday, Fani Willis, she said, I'm not showing up for that. At the time, Moore said his prayers were answered and added, I told you so. Here's where Colton Moore is a lot like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'm happy to see that an Angela Pence is sick of this. Michelle Baruchman writes, his viral social media posts and scathing attacks may be a larger part of his reputation because his legislative batting average, relatively low. Few of the bill's Moore sponsors, including measures seeking a reduction of the state income tax, additional state-level protection for the Second Amendment, and an effort to investigate the origins of the COVID pandemic, receive a committee hearing or a full vote on the Senate floor. Few of them got that far. Meanwhile, he has voted against an effort to crack down on human trafficking and opposed a bill that would criminalize the use of deep-fake computer-generated versions of politicians that could deceive voters. Angela Pence previously attempted to run against Marjorie Taylor Greene for Congress in 2022. Okay, I didn't know that. As a candidate for the Libertarian Party. Oh. However, Georgia law required her to attain signatures from at least 5% of active voters in the 14th congressional district in order to qualify, and she was unable to get on the ballot. During that race, Angela Pence defended drag performers who have been the frequent target of Republican critics. Hey, girl, telling the Libertarian magazine Reason, I don't see what the harm is in drag queens reading stories to kids. Politicians do it all the time. If parents want to take their kids to a drag queen story hour, that's their choice to make. Hey, Angela. She still stands by that viewpoint, but clarified that she does not support drag performers reading to children in public schools. She also opposes government funding of gender-affirming care, such as using Medicaid dollars for surgeries or treatment. Okay, we got to talk. It's okay. It's okay. Listen. She's not perfect. She wants to run for a Republican, role in the state house. She's not perfect. Okay, we get it. But she's running against Colton Moore, which means she is the lesser, literally, of the two evils. Continuing, She supports Georgia's 19 restrictions on abortion access. During her last campaign, she found out she was pregnant with her 9th child. She homeschools her children. Although she touted endorsements from mayors in her district, Pence is facing the uphill battle to unseat Moore, which she would still have to deal with if she were facing, again, Marjorie Taylor Greene. But at least we would see an effort from someone who claims to be a Republican, who claims to be a conservative, to combat the Colton Moores, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes in that district, who aren't always conservative or even evocative of those traditional values that we hear conservatives wax so nostalgic for. And look, here's another one of those scenarios where the conservative, family values, Main Street Republican types who have allowed money to fester in politics because of the politicians they elect, this is where this bites them in the ass. According to a campaign disclosure filing from January, Colton Moore raised more than $264,000 and had more than $48,000 in cash. Pence said she has not filed her finance records, but she had about $3,600 from donors in her district. $3,600 to $48,000. According to Moore's filing from January, his donations came from numerous states, including Florida, New Hampshire, New York, Texas, Utah, and Virginia. Her money, she says, it's all been local money. My support comes from people who live here. Now, listen, I'm not saying anyone on the left needs to go sending money to Angela Pence, because you have to wonder, is Colton Moore and Marjorie Taylor Greene at this point both enough useful idiots that continue to caricaturize their party in such a negative way that it actually helps Democrats politically and optically? Makes you wonder, right? But get this. When I looked up who's running for the Democratic Party nomination, it's just one guy, Bart Bryant. And Northwest Georgia News tried to do a Meet the Candidates column for the Senate district race in 53 there. Bart Bryant couldn't be reached. Follow the show on your preferred social media platform if you'd like. That would be at Ron Show ATL. Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads. I do not have a TikTok. I do. I personally have a TikTok, but I don't have one for the show. Here's the thing, y'all. Between personal social media, show social media, my real estate social media. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't even have a real estate TikTok. And those are like big deals. Like a lot of agents make a lot of contacts and get exposure through TikTok. First of all, logging out of one TikTok account and into another is kind of problematic. I don't even know if I remember the password for the one I have. So logging out means I may not be able to get back in, and I need my cat TikToks or videos, whatever you call them. What do you call those? Nonetheless, I don't have much of a stake in the TikTok ban. I didn't think it was smart optically to try and ban TikTok when Donald Trump and the GOP tried to do it, and I still don't think it's optically smart now. We've tried to ratchet up this notion that TikTok is somehow a national security threat. All this data, somehow a national security threat. And I think we've already seen that American-owned social media is a national security threat, right? Facebook led us right into the Donald Trump presidency, which Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban all enjoy seeing the effects of derailing us societally, politically, geopolitically. And we're not banning Facebook, right? We're not banning Twitter. We're not banning Instagram. Now, to their credit, I would say this. The Meta folks have really sort of taken the teeth out of the political dialogue on Facebook, for sure. And to some extent, I guess, Instagram as well. I don't know that Instagram was ever really a political vehicle for conversation. I mean, occasionally, but the TikTok ban to me is so problematic and so bereft with issues because there's already legal precedent. Just ask TikTok. They've had to fight bans in Montana and won. They fought the Trump ban and won. And I think they're going to try and fight this one as well. And I kind of think they're going to win. Also, there's this. It's not even like the majority of American people are on TikTok, but the majority of the Americans that are on TikTok obviously are against this ban, and they tend to be younger voters. Here we go again. with the younger voters, we're doing everything we can to let them know we don't care. And when I say we, I mean those of us who are trying not to see Donald Trump somehow win re-election. But all right, say here's the premise. There is the or part of this. Either we're going to ban TikTok or TikTok has to sell its U.S. TikTok to someone else. For that part, former Treasury Secretary, Trump Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says, yeah, I'll buy it without the algorithm even, which is kind of like, I don't know. It's like buying a Maserati without the engine. Why would you? What's the point? You're buying a shell of something that doesn't move. But I think he just wants to buy it just to mothball it. And when you've got that kind of money, man, just to buy something just to let it mothball. Ugh. But TikTok would still exist throughout the rest of the world. There would be, TikTok in Canada. There would be TikTok in Britain. There would be TikTok in France. There would be TikTok in Latin America. There would be TikTok in Asia. TikTok would still exist. We would just become sort of like the North Korea of TikTok. You can't just detach TikTok in the United States from the rest of the TikTok that exists in the world, because then we're running on a different version of TikTok and don't have the coalescing of the various entities of TikTok that exist globally. And that ain't gonna fly. So I don't know what the end game is here for those who are looking to ban TikTok in the United States. Ideally, the Chinese company that owns TikTok would sell to a non-Chinese company. But you know who's not going to go for that? The Chinese government. Because then they are realizing, we just saw the American government pressure one of our businesses to divest its core asset to someone else. They're going to draw a line in the sand there too. And the cries of national security, I'm not going to listen. I'm not at that pay grade. I'm not of that intellect that I could sit here and say, oh, that's bull crap, or no, it's absolutely true. I have no idea. I do know that TikTok's been around long enough now that if that's been the case, why are we just now doing something about it? Why did you let it roll out in the first place? And I know we have a mechanism in this country where there's a bureau, an agency that oversees foreign-owned businesses that do business in the United States, and they never stepped up. They never had any issues with TikTok. I don't know. This just feels like one of those things that's going to be, an embarrassing black eye on the Biden administration for getting on board with this, and to what end? Again, there's court precedent. This has been battled in courts at the state and at the federal level before, and it's failed. And forcing a spinoff of U.S. TikTok just to work within itself, well, that's going to make whoever buys it immensely unpopular to the consumer, to the point that folks will just ditch the app altogether. This does not work. It's not going to. You know what really sucks too when you think about it? Like, we had a TikTok before TikTok. Remember Vine? We had Vine. Instagram tried to compete with Vine by doing Vine-like things, but Twitter eventually bought Vine and then shut it down in 2017. And what a huge mistake, right? I mean, Twitter was kind of struggling back then. It still is. But Twitter bought Vine and then shut it down in 2017. And clearly there was a need for Vine because we wound up with TikTok. Can we revive Vine? I would literally think that if we revive Vine in competition with TikTok, maybe you get TikTok to think about divesting in. I don't know. I don't see a political means to this that works to anybody's advantage. That's going to do it for the Ron Show. I don't even know. Why did I think about that today? I just did. Whatever. Thanks for listening. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Back tomorrow 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. Have a great day.